Great, 1630. And just waiting for you to... Okay, there it is. YouTube is live. Free will and responsibility. I knew I didn't put the page. Oh, wait. Or was it today that I had to finish the other book? No. Okay, so I have to put the date. 26th. Okie dokie. Alright, so I am live. Okay, excellent. Alright, we'll get some Zach going. Volume check. Okay, excellent. Get some Zach going. That's good. Okay, so chapter 7, Delusion and Confabulation. 7.1, the introduction. So this chapter and the next chapter will discuss the philosophical and scientific issues raised by the study of unusual behaviors, often characterized as signs of pathological or neurodivergent conditions. We think that this is important for three reasons. First, the vulnerability of human agents to unusual behavior needs to be taken into account when seeking a realistic rather than idealized conception of the mind. Second, some unusual behaviors are philosophically important in their own right. They raise philosophical questions that are worth serious attention, the kind of questions that might not be asked if we confine our discussion to statistically normal phenomena. Third, unusual behaviors provide us with useful data for thinking about mind and cognition in general. As we will see, they provide new insights into many of the topics we have already discussed in this book, including rationality, self-knowledge, mind reading. That was mentioned, but I think that's going to be discussed in chapter 8. Mind reading, empathy, moral judgment, and moral behavior. Among many different kinds of unusual psychological and behavioral phenomena, this chapter will discuss delusion and confabulation, which are characterized by people misrepresenting reality and are considered as symptoms of mental disorders. In chapter 8, we will discuss two neurodivergent conditions: autism, which is characterized by people exhibiting atypical communicative and social interactions, and psychopathy, which is characterized by people engaging in atypical moral and social behavior. They don't engage in pro-social behavior, even atypical pro-social behavior. All right. It is tempting to think that delusions and confabulations are distinctive in how they distort reality. Definitions of delusion and confabulation in psychology and psychiatry tend to characterize them as beliefs with evident epistemic faults. For instance, as beliefs that are false or irresponsive to evidence. Suppose that Judy has the delusion that she is harassed and harmed by envious coworkers when, as a matter of fact, her coworkers are sympathetic to her and supportive. Well, we've got here persecutory delusion. Suppose that Jacob reports that he walked on the beach with his mother this morning, but his mother died 30 years ago. All right, so a distorted memory. It is tempting to think that Judy's delusion and Jacob's confabulation are false and irrational in a distinctive way, distinctive from the rest of us. So chapters 1 and 2 provide numerous examples of beliefs that are false and irrational in non-clinical contexts. Many people's beliefs are false and irrational. For example, some of those that are produced by heuristic processes, e.g., the belief that Linda is more likely to be a feminist bank teller than a bank teller in the Linda experiment reported by Tversky and Kahneman. Many of the explanations that people offer for their attitudes and choices are also inaccurate and not grounded in evidence. E.g., the claim that the stockings were chosen for their superior quality in the stockings experiment by Nisbet and Wilson, 1977. However, we might think that the distortions of reality present in delusions and confabulations are different from those we find in everyday beliefs and explanations. One possibility, however, we might think that the distortions of reality present in delusions and confabulations are different from those we find in everyday beliefs and explanations. One possibility is that the irrationality of Judy's delusion about being harassed and harmed by envious coworkers is different in kind from the irrationality of the belief that Linda is more likely to be a feminist bank teller than a bank teller. The inaccuracy of Jacob's report about his morning walk with his mother is different in kind from the inaccuracy of people's explanations of their consumer choices. Another possibility is that the irrationality of delusions and the inaccuracy of confabulations are different in degree, not in kind, from the irrationality and inaccuracy of everyday beliefs. Delusions and confabulations fall short of the relevant standards of rationality and accuracy to a greater extent. Judy's delusion about being harassed and harmed by envious coworkers is significantly more irrational than the everyday irrational belief about Linda being more likely to be a feminist bank teller than a bank teller. Jacob's report of his walk with his mother is more obviously inaccurate than people's everyday inaccurate explanations of their consumer choices. Now, a competing possibility is that delusions and confabulations are not distinctive in their epistemic faults. They are neither epistemically faulty in a distinctive way, nor more epistemically faulty than everyday beliefs and explanations. But they appear so because they are unusual and less widespread. After an introductory overview of the phenomenon of delusion, we briefly review the literature on delusion formation and discuss what empirical findings and theories tell us about the process through which delusions are formed and maintained. We then examine a series of arguments for the conclusion that delusions are too irrational to be regarded as beliefs. We focus on two of these arguments: that delusions are not responsive to evidence, epistemic irrationality, and that they do not consistently drive action, agential irrationality. And that will be in this very next section, 7.2. This discussion will lead to some general considerations about the nature of belief. We then examine the irrationality of delusions in more detail, section 7.3. We first focus on whether people who have delusions reason in a less rational way than people who do not have delusions. Although delusions may exhibit several kinds of irrationality, none of these kinds of irrationality uniquely and distinguishes delusions from non-clinical interaction beliefs. Next, we turn to confabulation, section 7.4. We begin by discussing its definition and sketching the most influential theories about the mechanisms responsible for its occurrence. Then we turn to whether the distortion of memory reports in confabulation is distinctive or whether it can also be observed in everyday memory reports. We will see that distorted memories are a very common occurrence. This discussion will lead to some general considerations about the nature and function of human memory. Should we conceive of remembering as retrieving accurate information about the past, or as developing a coherent story from a number of clues by using the capacities involved in inference and imagination? Alright, so section 7.2. So you know what I was doing yesterday? Not yesterday, Sunday. I had that camera going so that I had the dogs on the stream. Where are you going? Okay, great. Well, I know how to do it. The question is just, while you're sitting there at your desk, you're gonna be visible. Yeah. How do we feel about that? You have been, but how do you feel about you sitting there working and not being visible? Okay. Hello, Kathleen Quinn. Oh, I gotta get this camera up. They're about to fight.
I would say it's like having another producer in the room that knows exactly what your song needs. This is Co-Producer, the fastest way to find samples that fit your track. It listens to your track and pulls in samples that fit the rhythm, harmony, and key automatically.
Okay, it's still setting this thing up. Here we go. Doesn't look great, but maybe that's alright.
Unlimited access to every sound, so no credits, no pay-per download, just drag and drop. Simple. You can audition everything inside your
Alright, that's not bad.
Made by actual musicians.
Keep the people engaged. Alright, and then we gotta do the same one on the other streams. I just keep my make it smaller. Alright, let's see. Looks probably pretty good. That's probably pretty good. Alright, let's hit it. I just gotta. Is this chair as high as it can be? Oh my gosh, no, it was not. I had no idea. Excellent. Alright, well, now I'm just straight up. Well, that's alright. But maybe a little bit. My mic wasn't on. That was really funny to you for a second, huh? Thought that was hilarious. How long has it not been on for? I gotta find out. Let's see. Interaction beliefs. Next, turn to confabulation. Section 7.4. We begin by discussing its definition and sketching the most influential theories about the or its occurrence. Distortion of memory reports in confabulation is distinctive, or whether it can also be observed in everyday memory reports. I gotta find out when my mic went off. Distorted memories are a very common occurrence. This discussion will lead to some general considerations about the nature and function of human memory. Should we conceive of remembering as retrieving accurate information about the past, or as developing a coherent story from a number of clues by using the capacities involved in inference and imagination? Alright, so section 7.2. So you know what I was doing yesterday? Alright, blah 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 blah. Sunday. Still setting this Alright, so just looks like this whole section. God dang it. That's right, it's okay, I can do it again. Alright, let me... Ah. No, skip to... Alright, what? So just look at this whole section. God dang it. Alright, so delusion. Section 7.2, delusion. I'm gonna put the head back on. I look really handsome with that. Alright, here you go. Excellent. Okay. So, what are delusions? Well, in the literature we review in this chapter, the term delusion refers to a clinical phenomenon, and in particular to an observable symptom of schizophrenia, delusional disorders, dementia, amnesia, and other psychiatric disorders. There is no universally accepted definition of delusion, but generally, a delusion can be understood as a belief that is held despite obvious, whatever that might mean, counter evidence, and that is not explained by the person's social, cultural, or religious background. For example, Samir firmly believes that God has an important mission for him, communicated via the movement of a dog raising its paw in front of the town church. Not only is Samir's belief unusual and plausible and not supported by his existing beliefs, it is also an idiosyncratic belief. Other people, even people from his religious community, do not share his belief. Delusions can have a variety of themes. Some common delusional themes are listed in box 7C. So, delusion of persecution. A person reports that other people are hostile and intend to cause them harm. Delusion of reference. A person reports that other people or objects are somehow referring to her. People are talking about her, objects conveying messages to her, etc. And in the delusion of grandiosity, a person reports that she has special powers or talents that other people do not recognize. Other delusions involve more bizarre themes. In delusional anosognosia, people deny an illness or impairment that is obvious to everyone else, such as the paralysis of a limb. In the Capgras delusion, a person reports that someone close to her spouse, or a family member has been replaced by an imposter. And in the Cotard delusion, a person reports that she is disembodied or dead. Okie dokie. So delusions can occur monothematically or polythematically. In a monothematic case, a person is delusional about one particular topic. A monothematic delusion has been described as an island of irrationality within a sea of rationality. In a polythematic case, in contrast, a person is delusional about multiple topics, and the person typically ends up with a delusional belief system. Delusions due to brain damage, such as stroke or brain injury, tend to occur monothematically, while delusions in schizophrenia can occur polythematically. Here are two cases to illustrate the distinction. The first is a case of polythematic delusion involving delusions of persecution, reference, and grandiosity. The second is a case of monothematic delusion in which the person has delusional anosognosia concerning her left hand. A 31-year-old woman with chronic schizophrenia. The patient had been ill for 7 years. At the time of the interview, she reported olfactory and somatic hallucinations, but no auditory or visual hallucinations. She noticed an occasional, unexplained powdery smell about her body, something like the smell of baby powder, and was distressed by the experience of physical blows raining down on her head on a daily basis. Marked paranoia was present. She avoided all contact with her family, believing that they would harm her if they knew of her location. She also avoided public places, being generally distrustful of other people. She believed that people followed her with their eyes and gossiped about her whenever she went out in public. The only places that she was prepared to frequent on a relatively regular basis were the gym, at times when other people were unlikely to be present, and a local church that she had started attending. She also described a special freckle on her body. This was a freckle that God had made especially for her to mark her as his chosen. She believed that she had a special relationship with God. God had stepped in to save her from her enemies, and this was because she had a mission. That was why she had returned to the church, to find out about her mission for God. Patient LA, clinical record 9A NA 472 1980, was a 65-year-old right-handed woman who was admitted to the emergency department of our hospital on the evening of 2 July 1980. Shortly before admission, she had suddenly developed left hemiplegia without loss of consciousness. Alert and cooperative, she claimed that the reason for her hospitalization was sudden weakness and annoying paresthesia of the right limbs. Her narrative, supplied in a mild state of anxiety, was indeed accompanied by sustained massage of the allegedly hyposthenic right inferior limb. She also claimed that the left hand did not belong to her, but had been instead forgotten in the ambulance by another patient. And then, on request, she admitted without hesitation that her left shoulder was part of her body, and inferentially came to the same conclusion as regards her left arm and elbow, given, as she remarked, the evident continuity of those members. She was elusive about the forearm, but instead insisted in denying ownership of the left hand. Even when it had been passively placed on the right side of her trunk, she could not explain why her rings happened to be worn by the fingers of the alien hand. So she's like, yeah, obviously that's my shoulder. Look, it's connected to my chest. Well, yeah, obviously that's my upper arm. What do you mean? It's connected to the shoulder that's obviously mine. Now, this forearm, this hand is not mine, bro. So how are delusions formed? How does a person come to believe, for example, that her family members would harm her if they knew of her location, case 1, or that her left hand did not belong to her, case 2? In research of the delusional formation process, a widespread idea is that delusions, or at least most of them, are formed in response to an abnormal experience. Brenton Marr is an influential advocate of this view. Marr contrasted two accounts of delusion formation: the reasoning abnormality account, or the thought disorder account, and the perceptual abnormality account. He argues that available evidence supports only the latter account. According to Marr, delusions are explanations of abnormal experiences. The reasoning involved in generating and adopting the explanation is the operation of normal cognitive processes, which is essentially indistinguishable from that employed by non-patients, by scientists, and by people generally, says Marr. But what kind of abnormal experience do people with delusions have? Hayden Ellis and Andrew Young, who studied people with the Capgras delusion, and remember that's when, well, they say it in here, but just quickly, you recognize a face, but you don't believe it's actually that person because you have none of the accompanying feeling that you would normally have if you were to see that person. So it's also called imposter syndrome. You say, oh, no, they must be an imposter. So Hayden Ellis and Andrew Young, who studied people with the Capgras delusion, argue that the delusion is formed in response to an abnormal experience of familiar faces. It is known that typical individuals exhibit stronger autonomic responses, measured by skin conductance response, like how much you sweat, when perceiving a familiar face than when perceiving an unfamiliar face. However, the asymmetry in autonomic responses is missing in people with the Capgras delusion. This finding seems to suggest that when seeing a familiar face, a person with the Capgras delusion visually recognizes the familiar features of a face, but is not able to feel an affective form of familiarity. It's like they receive a veridical image of a person they are looking at, which stimulates all the appropriate overt semantic data held about that person, but they lack another, possibly confirming set of information which may carry some sort of affective tone. And in facing such an abnormal experience, people adopt some sort of rationalization strategy in which the individual before them is deemed to be an imposter, a dummy, a robot, or whatever extant technology may exist. All right, multiple factors. Oh, my bad. Multiple factors. Multiple factors. We saw that the Capgras delusion results from the abnormal experience of seeing a familiar face, but not feeling the affective response that usually comes with it. So far, this is consistent with Marr's view. However, Tony Stone and Andrew Young go on to argue that the abnormal experience is not sufficient to explain the Capgras delusion. In addition to the abnormal experience, a reasoning bias is necessary. Their main argument is that the mere presence of an abnormal experience does not account for the adoption of such a bizarre explanation. Yeah, it's bizarre in the sense of like it's wrong, but it's not bizarre in the sense that your ass wouldn't do the exact same thing. I don't know if you guys have looked around at human explanations for things, but we're kind of bad at coming up with explanations for things. Have you guys heard of gods? Have you heard of like souls and stuff? Okay, great. This author hasn't, so tell him if you see him. Or whoever I'm disagreeing with right now. Maybe it's not the author, it's who the author's talking about, I don't know. Oh yeah, it's Tony Stone and Andrew Young that I'm disagreeing with, not the author. In addition to the abnormal experience, a reasoning bias is necessary, so these fools claim. Well, I mean, yeah, but doesn't have to be different from normal human reasoning. It's like what Marr said. Their main argument is that the mere presence of an abnormal experience does not account for the adoption of such a bizarre explanation. No, being Homo sapiens says that. Why does the patient form such a bizarre belief to explain their anomalous experience and not adopt what Mark calls the more natural explanation by simply saying that things seem strange and stopping there? Right, because we didn't evolve to do that. We evolved we evolved in conditions where typically you could get to a, pretty reasonable explanation. Hey, why is that bush moving? Oh, because there's a predator there waiting for me. Or oh, because of the wind. Now so we didn't need to ever evolve a sense of, you know what? I don't know. That's going to require further investigation. Okay. So tell that also to Stone and Young. I want you to write them a whole letter, please. Because humans didn't evolve to do that. So Stone and Young, therefore, propose a multifactorial account of the Capgras delusion, in which the contributing factors include not only the abnormal experience of seeing a familiar face without feeling the affective response usually associated with it, but also a form of reasoning bias, which they call a bias toward observational adequacy. That sounds interesting. So, a healthy belief change requires maintaining an appropriate balance between two conflicting imperatives: incorporating new observations into one's belief system, which is observational adequacy, and keeping existing beliefs as long as possible, diaxastic conservatism. So this is a healthy belief change. So he's talking about Bayesian reasoning. He's saying that what would be healthy, which is, I don't know what he means by healthy, like healthy for our rationality. Okay, fine. But if he's talking about like a normal healthy brain, you're saying that you think that a normal healthy brain Oh, I see. It is lagging. All right. So what if I don't need that. Where is that? Ah, here it is. Boom. All right, that'll help. Okay, great. All right, let's just keep going. So encoding overloaded. Consider turning down video settings or using a faster pre-coding. Why are you still overloaded? Got that video from my screen. What if I close some apps? Is that gonna do anything for me? Alright, let's see if that. Nope. And oops. What if I do this? How about turning down video settings or using a faster encoder? Just one more time, see what happens if that message pops up again. Okay, maybe we are good. Okay, so bias toward observational adequacy. So a healthy, don't know what that means, belief change requires being Bayesian. And so they're giving up too quickly on their existing beliefs, which is classic human tendency. Observational adequacy ensures that a person's beliefs reflect reality, while doxastic conservatism ensures that the person has a stable worldview. According to Stone and Young, people with the Capgras delusion have a bias toward the former imperative. This is why just like every other human, gotcha. When a person has the abnormal experience of a familiar face, he does not hesitate to revise his existing belief that the woman is his real wife and come to the conclusion, to revise his existing belief that the woman is his real wife and come to the conclusion that she is not his real wife, which does incorporate the new observation. This is so crazy because, like, people who, believe in ghosts, humans don't have to see ghosts multiple times to believe in them. These guys, I mean, this is just more Homo economicus. What about ghosts? I mean, only like you know, the best trained scientific minds would think that they are seeing a ghost. I mean, would have the experience of seeing a ghost and go, nah, nah, ghosts are, I'm not updating my belief just based on that experience. Or, people who know, a good amount about psychology and how unreliable the mind is. But I've definitely met people who they said that they believe in ghosts, and their reason was because they saw one ghost one time. Max Colthart and colleagues propose a general theory of monothematic delusion known as the two-factor theory. Two-factor theorists follow Stone and Young in rejecting the idea that an abnormal experience is sufficient for the development of a delusion. Oh, period. In addition to an abnormal experience or abnormal data, which is the first factor, there has to be another factor. The main argument for the second factor in the formation of the Capgras delusion goes as follows. Just like people with the Capgras delusion, people with damage to the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, the VMPFC, fail to show the asymmetrical autonomic responses between familiar and unfamiliar faces, which suggests that people with the Capgras delusion and those with VMPFC damage have a similar abnormal experience of seeing familiar faces. However, people with VMPFC damage do not develop the Capgras delusion. Okay, that's compelling. That's compelling for sure. I think if I can think of why that could be. So, Ramachandran, here's how he explains the. Oh, I wasn't holding it up this high when I was trying to show you. Oh, I can do it like this. So, VPMFC, it's like, okay. Does it say right or left? No, okay. Now, here's Ramachandran's explanation of Capgras delusion. So, vision happens back here, okay? So, you have your eyeballs here, and then there's like a cable that runs the information from the retina to the back of the brain, the visual cortex, okay? And there's a part of the occipital lobe, this region, that is involved in recognizing faces. I don't know, maybe somewhere around here. Okay, now the face is recognized. Okay, so that's it. So everybody is good with that. If you have Capgras delusion, you can have VMPFC damage, whatever. You're like, yeah, that's that looks like my mother. Okay. Then that identification gets sent into the brain. Okay. So like into there. Just into there somewhere. And that's where the identification, so imagine I'm pointing through the brain or into the brain. The identification there triggers the associated feelings, okay? So first you recognize the person, then you feel what you usually feel about that person. Now, Ramachandran says that the problem with Capgras delusion, of course, we know that the stream getting to here is fine, but there's a problem getting here. Okay. He has a good diagram. Okay, um, so wait, which one do we want? I think it's like this one, and there's a problem with it. Let me go to the actual thing. Hmm. All right, maybe I won't be able to find it actually, or maybe there actually isn't. Maybe I always imagined that there was a diagram where it actually like shows the stream interrupted. The anatomical organization of the visual pathways, the fibers from the eyeball diverge in two parallel streams, a new pathway that goes to the lateral geniculate nucleus, and an old pathway that goes. This is not at all. Ah, okay, the new pathway goes to the visual cortex and diverges again after a couple of relays into two pathways. Okay, the white arrows. A how pathway in the parietal lobes that is concerned with grasping, navigation, and other spatial functions, and the second what pathway in the temporal lobes concerned with recognizing objects. These two pathways are discovered, blah, blah. Let's see if I can find the passage. Oh, was it in the introduction? Uh, Here we go. Capgras delusion. So, what really causes Capgras syndrome? To understand this disorder, you have to first realize that vision is not a simple process. When you open your eyes in the morning, it's all out there in front of you, and so it's easy to assume that vision is effortless and instantaneous. But in fact, within each eyeball, all you have is a tiny distorted upside down image of the world. This excites the photoreceptors in the retina, and the messages then go through the optic nerve to the back of the brain. Okay, going to the back of the brain, where they are analyzed in 30 different visual areas. Only after that do you begin to finally identify what you're looking at. Is it your mother? Is it a snake? Is it a pig? And that process of identification takes place partly in a small region called the fusiform gyrus, the region which is damaged in patients with face blindness or prosopagnosia. Finally, once the image is recognized, the message is relayed to a structure called the amygdala, sometimes called the gateway to the limbic system, the emotional core of your brain, which allows you to gauge the emotional significance of what you are looking at. Is this a predator? Is it a prey which I can chase? Is it a potential mate? Or is it my departmental chairman I have to worry about? Blah, blah, blah. So, uh, in David's case, which was the case study, perhaps the fusiform gyrus and all the visual areas are completely normal, so his brain tells him that the woman he sees looks like his mother. But to put it crudely, the wire that goes from the visual centers to the amygdala to the emotional centers is cut by the accident. So he looks at his mother and thinks she looks just like my mother, but if it's my mother, why don't I feel anything toward her? No, this can't possibly be my mother. It's some stranger pretending to be my mother. Okay. So, okay. Think maybe I've got a guess. So the ventral medial prefrontal cortex is involved in sort of the emotions affect aspect of a decision, of a judgment. So let's see. Well, first of all, let's confirm that. So it integrates affective, sensory, and social cues, long term memory, and self representations, playing a critical role in shaping affective responses based on conceptual information about specific outcomes. So, my guess would be that the reason that they don't have the delusion is because the problem happens at a higher level. So what I mean is, and it's not the whole higher level that's problematic. So what I mean is the base experience stuff, right? The perceptual stuff, the limbic emotional stuff, all that stuff is intact. Then the amygdala could maybe be feeding hate, love. So first the occipital lobe, the visual cortex says this is our mother. This is my mother. To the amygdala's like, oh yeah, I'm feeling the warmth, I'm feeling the love. And then sends that on to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex eventually. And the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is having trouble putting that together, but maybe other places still get the information from the amygdala. And so it really is an interpretive issue, not an experience one. And so if that's the case, then other interpretive mechanisms that are still intact get the true, the normal experience, and so are able to compete with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex in the explanation. That's kind of my thinking, that it's not. Yeah, I think that that's what I would want to guess, but I do want to discuss that with ChatGPT. And you know, right? Let's see. Hey, what is it? 2:33. Well, you'll take the dogs for a walk. So I probably have like half an hour, 40 minutes. Well, we'll just see what we can do, but I definitely am curious about this. Um, is it valuable that I do this? Yeah, because it's just like good practice thinking about the networks, and I don't get a lot of cool opportunities like this to hypothesize with a case study. Uh, so let's add ChatGPT. Okay, so I'm reading about Coulthart and colleagues. Two-factor theory recapgra. They seem to be saying that Capgras delusion involves a problem with the reasoning processes of the Capgras patient. Because apparently they think that the normal human reasoning processes are Bayesian. One piece of evidence they offer is that patients with VMPFC damage who have a similar abnormal experience, right? Okay, they did say that, of seeing familiar faces. VMPFC damage. So I have lost confidence in this because of the fact that reportedly they have a similar abnormal experience of seeing faces. Don't develop the delusion that the face is worn by an imposter. As an alternative, I'm wondering if that could instead be explained by the level of processing at which there's a problem. In the typical case of Cabral, where, according to Ramachandran, the stream from fusiform to amygdala is damaged. All the highest interpretive mechanisms are receiving this bizarre mismatch of identification and affect. On the other hand, in the VMPFC case, damage case, many higher interpretive mechanisms maybe are receiving, a a consonant story about the face, even if the VMPFC is struggling with the story. And then those other higher interpretive regions, I'm supposing, compete with the VMPFC such that the patient does not develop the delusion. I'm totally okay with this hypothesis being wrong. You can encourage me for thinking about it and whatever plausibility the explanation does have. Okay, so let's hear this.
This is excellent thinking, Eris, and genuinely a plausible and constructive reframing of the problem. Let's break it down into what you're doing right and where your hypothesis holds up well. Then examine how it fits, or doesn't, within current neurocognitive monoillusion formation, like Coulthard's. What you're doing right and why it's great. 1. You're questioning the level of processing involved. That's a strong move. Coulthard's two-factor theory focuses on Factor 1, the anomalous experience, e.g., face feels off due to loss of autonomic affective response. Factor 2, a deficit in belief evaluation. Reasoning system allows delusional belief to form and persist. You're asking, open quote, what if the difference isn't in reasoning competence per se, but in how widely the anomaly is propagated across the system? Close quote. This is highly plausible and aligns with modern distributed processing theories. You're not just accepting that the presence or absence of delusion must mean the reasoning system is intact or damaged. You're exploring the internal competition within interpretation-generating mechanisms. That's deeply Craig.
Aw.
2. You're rejecting a misleading normative assumption. Coulthard assumes human reasoning is Bayesian and generally rational, and a failure to reject the anomalous belief is a pathological deviation. But you're suspicious of that. Rightfully so. Our minds are filled with wild non-Bayesian shortcuts and bugs. So to say Capgras patients must have a reasoning deficit because they form and maintain a delusion is shaky. You're inviting an explanation that doesn't require normative Bayesian sanity as a baseline. This is entirely compatible with IT theory and the worse-ass illusions, particularly rationality and source reason. Top 3. You're implicitly modeling this with interacting ITs, your alternative explanation. Open quote. Maybe in VMPFC patients, higher interpretive mechanisms are receiving a consonant story about the face, even if VMPFC is struggling. Close quote. That maps beautifully onto an IT network model. The fusiform amygdala disconnection case in Capgras leads to ITs triggering high salience but low effective valence. The VMPFC damage case might still allow other ITs to deliver a familiar and effectively matched story. So instead of saying, open quote, the reasoning module is broken, close quote, you're saying, open quote, the input to the reasoning process is more globally disrupted in Capgras than in VMPFC damage. Reasoning isn't the broken link, it's just the endpoint of a wildly biased cascade. Close quote. That's very Craig, very plausible, and a genuinely helpful model. How does this compare to Coulthard's theory? Coulthard's two-factor theory, recap. 1. First factor, perceptual anomaly, e.g. no autonomic arousal to familiar face. 2. Second factor, impairment in belief evaluation, e.g. a tendency to accept and fixate on implausible beliefs. Coulthard points out that many people can have anomalous experiences without forming delusions. Therefore, delusions require both the experience and a reasoning failure. But you're suggesting, open quote, what if the difference is not a damaged reasoning module, but the extent and level of representation at which the anomaly appears? Close quote. In Capgras, the mismatch, familiar face, no effect, is global. Many systems receive it. It's cross-confirmed, so a delusional belief is automatically plausible within the system. In VMPFC damage, the mismatch is local, perhaps limited to social or emotional regulation circuits. It doesn't get reinforced across other ITs, and therefore doesn't spawn the same delusional outcome. That's a mechanistic alternative to the reasoning deficit theory, and it's a much more distributed and systems-level explanation, totally consistent with modern computational neuroscience. Is your hypothesis likely to be right? Strengths. It provides an alternative to the rigid, faulty belief evaluation model. It explains how delusion formation could depend on network-level consensus rather than one broken reasoner. It's consistent with predictive coding and hierarchical models of inference. It fits well with IT theory and non-dual models of cognition. Weaknesses or caveats. Not all delusions arise from effective anomalies, e.g. Cotard, Fragoli, or somatoparaphrenia involve different primary triggers. There's some evidence that even with widespread anomalies, not everyone develops delusions. So trait vulnerability, like schizotypy or pre-existing reasoning styles, may still play a role. Your hypothesis needs a clearer definition of what counts as higher interpretive mechanisms and how they compete, but that can be developed.
Alright, very good. So, it's a thought. It's a thought, and there you go. And that was tons of fun. It isn't fun, is why that video is not updating. Oh, I know why. Great. You want to come up here? Hey, Oliver. I was talking to Oliver. You want to come up here? You gonna jump up? No? Okay. Alright. So, people with VMPFC damage do not develop the Capgras delusion. The best explanation of this is that the abnormal experience is not sufficient for the development of the Capgras delusion, and the second factor explains why people with the Capgras delusion, but not those with VMPFC damage, develop a delusional belief. Similar arguments about other monothematic delusions have also been presented. There are different proposals among two-factor theorists concerning the nature of the second factor. Ryan McKay, for instance, follows Stone and Young's suggestion that the inferential step from the first factor, e.g., an abnormal experience of seeing familiar faces, to the delusional belief, e.g., this woman is not my wife, involves a bias toward observational adequacy, and this bias is the second factor. Max Coulthart, Peter Menzies, and John Sutton, in contrast, claim that the inferential step from the first factor to the delusional belief is not biased. The second factor is thus not a biased inference from the experience to the delusional belief. According to Coulthart and colleagues, once the delusional belief has been adopted, people with a delusion irrationally maintain the delusional belief despite counter-evidence. Such resistance to counter-evidence, which is described as a deficit in belief evaluation, is the second factor. Wait, what? Oh, I got confused. Okay, I see. If it wasn't Coulthart that was talking about oh, okay, so I got that wrong. But so Coulthart says that it's oh. So Coulthart, hold on. Okay, right. Okay, so I had gotten that wrong about who was saying what. No worries. Okay. So Coulthart says that Coulthart is there's a deficit in belief evaluation, whereas I don't know who, maybe Trinell. So there has to be another factor. The main argument for the second factor in the formation of the Capgras delusion goes as follows. blah, 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 blah. Okay, just that there must be a second factor, right? Oh, Stone and Young therefore propose a multifactorial account of the Kapka delusion in which the contributing factors include not only the abnormal experience of seeing a familiar face without feeling the affective response usually associated with it, but also a form of reasoning bias, which they called bias toward observational adequacy. Okay, so Stone and Young. So Stone and Young say that, and then Coulthard says that. Gotcha. All right, very good. So, prediction errors. The disagreement between Marr on one hand and Stone and Young on the other hand is whether an abnormal experience is sufficient for delusion formation, or whether a reasoning bias or deficit or fucking normal human reasoning is sufficient for delusion formation. Or instead, whether a reasoning bias or deficit is also necessary. One might think, however, that the debate is based upon a dubious assumption. No. Namely, that there is a sharp dichotomy between experiential factors and reasoning factors. In discussing Marr's proposal, Richard Bentel, for example, says that the clear distinction made between perception and inference is in reality oversimplistic, and perception is to some extent belief driven. Of course, right. That's interesting. Okay. So the prediction error theory rejects a sharp distinction between perceiving and reasoning or believing, at least at the neurophysiological level. And what other fucking level is there? Actually, I know. How do I say level? Like a beta other question. No, that's gonna look like cognitive error. So Paul Fletcher and Chris Frith write, the boundaries between perception and belief at the physiological level are not so distinct. An important principle that has emerged is that both perception of the world and learning about the world, and therefore beliefs, are dependent on predictions and the extent to which they are fulfilled. This suggests that a single deficit could explain abnormal perceptions and beliefs. The prediction error theory of delusion is based on a general theory of the brain and its functions that is known as the predictive coding theory or the predictive processing theory, which is one of the most exciting things, new things in neuro. So Clark and Anil Seth. Anyway, I have Anil Seth's book, but I actually want to show you Clark's book. Anyway, the predictive coding theory explains the functions of the brain, including perceptual functions and reasoning functions, in a unified manner in terms of minimizing prediction errors, i.e., the mismatch between an expectation and an actual input. Applying this general framework to delusions, prediction error theorists argue that delusions can be explained without a sharp perceiving, reasoning distinction in terms of an abnormality in processing prediction errors. So, very exciting. A remarkable study suggests that the processing of prediction errors is indeed abnormal in people with delusions in the context of schizophrenia. In the study, two groups of subjects, people with delusions due to schizophrenia and non-clinical controls, were tested in a task involving learning and predicting a person's allergic reactions to food items. The activity of the right prefrontal cortex. Oh, and I keep saying that this is the ventral medial, but that's not ventral enough. I just for some reason always stopped there, but then I glanced over here when I looked up the VPMFC, and it's actually here. It's like that. Not what I said, which is that. which is dumb because it's ventral. So we've got these schizophrenics and these normal people who are supposed to like understand what foods these other people are allergic to. Okay, so keep track of their allergic reactions and learn from those. So the activity of the right prefrontal cortex, the RPFC, which has been identified as a reliable marker of prediction error processing in previous studies, was monitored with fMRI. Results showed that in the control group, the RPFC activity was much greater in cases where their predictions were disconfirmed than in the cases where they were confirmed, as if their brains were surprised when their predictions were disconfirmed, but not when they were confirmed. So that shows that the brain's like predicting things, and then it's only going, what's going on, if the prediction is wrong. Okie dokie, great. So in the delusional group, the asymmetry in the RPFC activity was diminished with respect to the control group, as if their brains were surprised not only when their predictions were disconfirmed, but also when they were confirmed. This finding might suggest that people with delusions are constantly surprised by events that others would consider irrelevant or insignificant, so they attach some special meaning or significance to those events, and delusions eventually arise as an explanation of their meaning or significance. Under the influence of inappropriate prediction error signal, possibly as a consequence of dopamine dysregulation, events that are insignificant and merely coincident seem to demand attention, feel important, and relate to each other in meaningful ways. Delusions ultimately arise as a means of explaining these odd experiences. So, are delusions beliefs? So far, we have been assuming that delusions are beliefs. For example, the woman with schizophrenia in case 1 believes that her family members would harm her if they knew of her location, and LAO in case 2 believes that her left hand does not belong to her. Whether delusions are beliefs, however, has been the focus of a recent philosophical debate. We will review 2 approaches to the nature of delusions. The first approach defends the common assumption that delusions are beliefs. Okay. Doxasticists agree that delusions are beliefs, but they may disagree about whether delusions are rational or irrational beliefs, and about whether they are continuous with or categorically different from non-delusional beliefs. The second approach is to regard delusions as something other than beliefs. Fuck that approach. We'll see. Anti-doxasticists agree that characterizing delusions as beliefs is unsatisfactory, but they disagree about the positive account that best captures the nation's... Oh, you have bags? Sarah? Yeah, bags. Great job. So anti-doxasticists agree that characterizing delusions as beliefs is unsatisfactory, but they disagree about the positive account that best captures the nature of delusions. So they agree amongst themselves, not that they agree with the first group. Although some argue that delusions are empty utterances with no meaning, most anti-doxasticists defend the view that delusions are mental states of a non-doxastic or non-exclusively doxastic nature, including acts of imagination, perceptual inferences, states in between beliefs and non-beliefs, states in between beliefs and imaginings, attitudes toward mental states, acceptances, or thoughts expressing the content of default processes. So we're going to review 2 arguments against the claim that delusions are best understood as beliefs. In response to these anti-doxastic arguments, we will argue that if we adopt a psychologically realistic view of the relationship between beliefs and evidence, and acknowledge the role that affective and motivational states play in driving action, anti-doxasticism can be resisted. Okay, not fuck anti-doxasticism. Definitely, there could be networks. Yeah. So for all these things that they talked about, the acts of imagination, of entertaining a belief, perceptual inferences, acceptances. Okay, they said so. All right, that's fine. Are not beliefs, but delusions are beliefs. That's what I don't get. So I mean, I agree with that's all fine, but but maybe delusions are one of these things, but then are kind of getting treated like beliefs. I mean, either way, delusions are extreme beliefs, no? Treated as extreme beliefs. Alright, this is definitely interesting. Okay, we will review two arguments against the claim that the best way to think of delusions is as beliefs. And so they're going to be responding to responses to that claim. And so in response to those responses, these guys are going to argue that if we adopt a psychologically realistic view of the relationship between beliefs and evidence and acknowledge the role that affective and motivational states play in driving action, then we can go ahead and stick with delusions are beliefs. Okay, so that's kind of the goal Okay, so the first argument against doxasticism concerns epistemic irrationality, and we call it the argument from responsiveness to evidence. Premise 1. It is a constitutive feature of beliefs that they are responsive to evidence, which is wild. That's so wild. These guys I can't wait till these guys see like a church or a synagogue or something, or a mosque or a temple. It is a constitutive feature of beliefs that they are responsive to evidence. It's so funny. Premise 2, delusions are not responsive to evidence. Conclusion, therefore, delusions are not beliefs. To evaluate this argument, we need to consider the plausibility of the two premises. Let us start with premise 2. Are delusions responsive to evidence? On some definitions of delusions, resistance to counter evidence is the main feature of delusions. This feature is also an important diagnostic criterion for delusions. According to DSM-5, delusions are fixed beliefs. It would be unwise to claim that all delusions are equally impervious to revision, but empirical evidence speaks in favor of the view that most delusions are not responsive to counter evidence. For instance, in a case report, a woman with erotomania, the delusion that one is loved by another person, usually a person of higher status, continued to believe that a man was in love with her and intended to propose to her even after she talked to him on the phone, and he told her that he was not in love with her and could barely remember who she was. This does not mean that delusional beliefs are completely insensitive to evidence, though. People tend to argue for the content of their delusions when they encounter challenges. So that means that they are reacting to the evidence. But I bet she was too. I bet she had a whole explanation, didn't she? Like, oh, I bet, his wife was nearby, or he's worried about getting fired because, we worked together briefly or something. Or he's doing it for me because he knows that I kind of want to work at his firm, whatever. Moreover, their conviction in their delusions may fluctuate, and sometimes it does so as a result of experience, reflection, or external challenges. Let us now consider premise 1. Do beliefs need to be responsive to evidence? There are several philosophical and psychological accounts of what constitutes a belief. There is very little agreement on the necessary and sufficient conditions for belief. Thus, it is hard to argue for or against the doxastic nature of delusions on the basis of what we take beliefs to be. Many accounts converge on the fact that responsiveness to evidence is a key feature of beliefs. It is a feature that, for instance, distinguishes beliefs from acts of imagination or wishful thinking. It is, however, debatable whether responsiveness to evidence is a criterion of belief or an ideal to which rational beliefs aspire. Many accounts converge on the fact that responsiveness to evidence is a key feature of beliefs. It is, however, debatable whether responsiveness to evidence is a criterion, key feature versus criterion of belief, or more so just an ideal to which rational beliefs aspire. Okay, I think that's what they mean. All right. We seem to categorize some attitudes as beliefs, even if they are not responsive to evidence. In some circumstances, we form beliefs and uphold them independently of whether the evidence supports them. In other circumstances, we form beliefs based on evidence, but we do not promptly update or reject them when counter evidence emerges. Examples include prejudice, superstitious, and religious beliefs. Beliefs in scientific theories. And religious beliefs, beliefs in scientific theories to which we are committed, and beliefs about ourselves in general, including beliefs about our traits, talents, weaknesses, and ideological convictions and ideological convictions. Thus, the argument from responsiveness to evidence does not seem to be conclusive as an argument against the doxastic nature of delusions. Doxasticists may respond to the argument by acknowledging that delusions tend to be resistant to counter evidence, while also pointing out that other instances of belief can be resistant too. This puts pressure on anti-doxasticists to either provide additional reasons to doubt the doxastic nature of delusion or conclude that other attitudes commonly described as beliefs are not genuine instances of beliefs due to their resistance to counter evidence. Anti-doxasticists can respond to this challenge, but we will not examine this debate further. The second argument against doxasticism concerns agential irrationality, and we will call it the argument from action guidance. Premise 1, it is a constitutive feature of beliefs that they guide action. Premise 2, delusions do not guide action. Conclusion, therefore, delusions are not beliefs. To evaluate this argument, we need to consider the plausibility of the two premises. So I'm basically checking out. So we'll just try to make it to this. Yeah, great. Okay, so premise 1, it is a constitutive feature of beliefs that they guide action. No, I disagree with that. Delusions do not guide action. I also disagree with that. So to evaluate this argument, we need to consider the plausibility of the two premises. Let us start with premise 2. Do delusions really fail to guide action? It is a diagnostic criterion for delusions that they lead to action. And thus it is impossible to claim that delusions generally fail to guide action. People have been known to engage in risky behavior, stop contacting their family, move cities, abandon their studies, and change their job as a result of their delusion. But some philosophers have commented on the phenomenon of double bookkeeping that seems to apply to at least some delusions. Double bookkeeping refers to the presence of conflicting commitments within an agent and is usually exemplified by people who make verbal reports that are not reflected in their nonverbal behavior. For instance, a man claims that the nurses in the hospital in which he is a patient want to poison him, but he eats the food they give him regardless. Yeah. Or a man claims that that he is a soul, but then seeks no remedy for his soul and instead takes medication that affects his brain. Or a man says that there is a God who wrote a Bible who has all of these rules, and then that man doesn't follow those rules. In such circumstances, it is legitimate to ask whether the man is serious in his allegations against the hospital nurses. No, it fucking isn't, and you already addressed this before in the duality section. You talked about subagents. I swear you keep forgetting this, bro. Um, so what about premise one? Action guiding is an important feature of beliefs, and just like responsiveness to evidence, it may help us distinguish beliefs from other attitudes. Believing that an untamed lion is in the room may lead us to run away, whilst imagining a lion in the room may not have the same effect. Believing that an untamed lion is in the room may lead us to run astray, whilst imagining a lion in the room may not have the same effect. That said, as with responsiveness to evidence, not all beliefs share the same action guiding potential. Some beliefs have a direct impact on behavior and some do not. Yeah, or you can believe there's a heaven and then try to keep someone from dying. Like, what a kind of a selfish prick would do that? Um, some beliefs have a direct impact on behavior and some do not. Some beliefs are acted on in some circumstances and not in others. The psychological literature on everyday instances of hypocrisy shows that cases of double bookkeeping are by no means confined to delusions. Great. One important consideration is the role played by motivation in turning beliefs into action. Even the most strongly held belief may not be acted on if independent factors inhibit motivation, such as an agent lacking confidence, fearing a sanction, or missing the opportunity to act. In psychiatric disorders characterized by delusions, and especially in schizophrenia, motivation is negatively affected. This might mean that genuine beliefs can generate the appropriate intentions to act, but fail to play their action guiding role. As a result, such intentions are not carried out and are not converted into action. This phenomenon provides some explanation for the apparent lack of commitment to some delusional states observed in the literature on double bookkeeping. The arguments we reviewed may not be convincing on their own, but they have been powerfully combined in the work of some influential anti-doxacists. If delusions fail to be responsive to evidence and they also fail to guide action in the relevant circumstances, one may deny that they have the same causal role as beliefs and wonder whether it is helpful to regard them as beliefs at all. Two options emerge: revisionism and conservatism about belief. So, revisionism recommends that we should change our terminology. Beliefs are only those attitudes that are responsive to evidence and guide action, i.e., that play the causal roles of beliefs. And we should find some other term to refer to those attitudes that share many of the features of beliefs, but which are less responsive to evidence and less influential on action than typical beliefs. Authors who pursue this strategy in different ways include Greg Curry, Andy Egan, Keith Frankish. All right, I like Keith Frankish, Dominic Murphy, and Eric Schwitzgebel. The worry with this particular revisionist strategy is that it does not necessarily lead to a philosophy of belief that is more compatible with psychological science or our everyday experience of believers. Instead, it is an attempt to preserve an idealized notion of belief that applies only to attitudes that conform to norms of rationality for beliefs. If followed through, this move would make the category of belief much less populated. True. That's a great point. Absolutely. Okay, I that sings. So never mind, Keith Frankish. Conservatism recommends that we should not change our terminology and that we should continue to use the term belief quite liberally. The category of belief needs to somehow be demarcated, but it should not be required of all attitudes to be responsive to evidence and to be action guiding to count as beliefs. Those who are conservative about the notion of belief have no reason to doubt the doxastic nature of delusions. Just like other attitudes that are resistant to evidence or that fail to guide action, delusional states can count as beliefs. After all, ascribing delusions often serves the same purpose as ascribing beliefs. It allows agents to predict and understand other agents' behavior, coordination, and cooperation. Both revisionism and conservatism can be plausibly defended, and the budding literature on the topic shows that philosophers can make sense of many features of delusions independently of the strategy they choose. One thing that cannot be ignored is that whether we regard delusions as beliefs or as something else, many of their epistemic features are shared by attitudes that are widespread in the non-clinical population, which suggest a continuity between so-called normal and abnormal cognition. Great. Alright, so I guess we'll just go until baby gets back. Baby gets back. Baby gets back. So, section 7.3, Delusion and Irrationality. Is delusional reasoning irrational? We'll now turn to the irrationality of delusions. According to the standard picture, irrationality consists in reasoning in accordance with logical mathematical rules, such as the conjunction rule or Bayes' rule. In chapter 1, we saw that humans systematically and predictably deviate from logical mathematical rules of reasoning. Our question here is whether people with delusions reason differently from people with no psychiatric delusions, and, in particular, whether people with delusions reason more irrationally than people with no psychiatric diagnosis. According to Eilhard van Domarus, 1944, delusions involve a distinctive failure of deductive reasoning. For example, a person might acquire the delusion that he is Napoleon on the basis of the following faulty reasoning. Premise 1, Napoleon was exiled and incarcerated. Premise 2, I had been exiled and incarcerated. Conclusion, therefore, I am Napoleon. Holy smokes. If van Domarus's hypothesis is correct, it strongly supports the view that the deductive reasoning of people with delusion is significantly more irrational than the deductive reasoning of people without known pathologies. People without known pathologies exhibit some errors and biases, sure, including the deductive errors shown in the Watson selection task, discussed in Chapter 1, and deductive biases such as the belief bias, discussed in Chapter 3, but they do not make these obvious errors in syllogistic reasoning. Van Domarus's hypothesis, however, is not widely accepted, mainly due to a lack of empirical support. In fact, the ability to reason deductively does not seem to be the ability to reason deductively does not seem to be especially impaired in people with delusions. For example, consider the following case of a person with anosognosia, the delusional denial of illness. PR, that's the name of the patient, concerning the paralysis of the left side of his body. On one occasion, the examiner placed PR's left hand on the bedclothes between his own hands and asked the patient whose hands they were. Unhesitatingly, PR replied that they were the examiner's hands. Questioned as to whether he had ever met a three-handed man, On one occasion, the examiner placed PR's left hand on the bedclothes. Oh, between his own hands. I see. Okay, very good. So we've got his hands, the patient's hands. No, we got the examiner's hands, and the patient puts his hand in there. Okay. Unhesitatingly, PR replied that all three were the examiner's hands. Questioned as to whether he had ever met a three-handed man, PR pointing to the 3 arms in front of him, answered that because the examiner had 3 arms, he also must have 3 hands. PR came to the delusional conclusion that the examiner had 3 hands, and their reasoning seems to be as follows. Premise 1, the examiner has 3 arms. Premise 2, anyone with 3 arms has 3 hands. Conclusion, therefore, the examiner has 3 hands. This looks like a reasonable piece of deductive reasoning, although this reasoning could be a post hoc justification of PR's denial of the ownership of the hand. The problem is not PR's reasoning, it is rather their acceptance of an implausible premise, the premise that the examiner had 3 arms, not 3 hands. That's wrong. The premise is that the premise 1 is the examiner has 3 arms. Premise 2 is anyone with 3 arms has 3 hands, and that's a good premise. If you see someone with 3 arms, I think it's fair to assume they've got 3 hands, bro. I guess it is, and I guess there are probably more cases where there's an arm that develops without an additional hand, but it sounds, pretty reasonable. Like if, I don't know. But even if von Domarus's hypothesis is wrong, there may still be doubts about Marr's strong claim that the reasoning of people with delusions is completely normal and essentially indistinguishable from that employed by non-patients, by scientists, and by people generally. There is, in fact, a strong body of evidence suggesting that probabilistic reasoning abnormalities, rather than deductive reasoning abnormalities, are associated with delusions. The most famous finding concerns the jumping to conclusion bias. So, the jumping to conclusion bias. In a well-known study, 3 groups of participants, a group with schizophrenic delusions, a group with a psychiatric, 3 groups of participants, a group with schizophrenic delusions, a group with a psychiatric condition but without delusions, and a group with no psychiatric conditions were asked to observe a jam jar with 100 colored beads in it and identify whether it was jar A, containing 85 pink beads and 15 green beads, or jar B, containing 15 pink beads and 85 green beads, on the basis of the beads drawn from it. The result revealed that participants in the delusional group tended to jump to the conclusion. They required less evidence, observing 2.22 beads on average, before coming to a conclusion that participants in the non-delusional group. They would look at, on average, 4.58 beads. And then participants in the non-clinical group, so psychiatric, I'm just picturing just a representation, just picturing that. Yeah, I just want to check. And then the normal people observed somewhere in between, 3.6 beats on average. One might think then that the jumping to conclusion bias clearly shows that people with delusions are significantly more irrational than non-clinical people in the sense that they do not wait to acquire sufficient evidence before reaching a conclusion in a probabilistic judgment. This is, however, too hasty. To see this, we need to clarify the notion of bias. The term bias can mean different things in different contexts. First, it can mean a deviation from some rational norms, such as logical mathematical rules. Let us call those deviations irrational biases. Base rate neglect, which we saw in Chapter 1, is an irrational bias, and a deviation from Bayes' rule. Second, bias can mean a deviation from statistically normal performance. Let us call such deviations abnormal biases. Excellent. The jumping to conclusion bias is an abnormal bias. Sorry? You mean that the jumping to conclusion bias is an abnormal bias. What studies have revealed is that people with delusions jump to conclusions more quickly than non-clinical people jump to conclusions, right? It's a matter of degree, bro. Everybody jumps to conclusions, bro. What? Come on. Every time I get excited, I'm like, what? By the way, thank you to this man for writing this book. I've never been able to write a book, and thank you. Put his ideas out there, and I shouldn't really be judging him based on like what's in here. I mean, he's gotten responses and he's thought about things differently. I don't know. Anyway, the jumping to conclusion bias is an abnormal bias, a deviation from normal performance. Haha, that's hilarious. But here's the crucial question. Is the jumping to conclusion bias also an irrational bias, a deviation from normative standards? What? How not? In the beads experiment, those with delusions required 2.22 beads on average before reaching a conclusion, which means that they reached a conclusion when the probability of the conclusion, e.g. the conclusion that it was jar A rather than jar B, was over 0.97 according to Bayesian statistics. I see. Okay. Endorsing a hypothesis whose probability is over 0.97 would be rational. Okay, yeah. For example, it would be rational for you to judge that it will rain today and take an umbrella with you when you go outside if reliable weather forecasts indicate that there is a 97% chance of rain today. All right, and we're going to leave it there. Okay, thank you, gang.